Hey everybody, this is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous good-looking friends. Hopefully, the majority of you have already seen the first part of this video series. If you haven't, no worries, you can always go back. For the most part, what I wanted you to get out of the last video was really just setting the foundation of how we got to where we are today in society and understanding the power dynamics of this top-down, one-world government approach that we're seeing, being led and pushed by these global elites. What we have been witnessing is, as a result of pushing these ideologies included in these financially incentivized initiatives, has hurt and damaged a lot of people, and people are angry and speaking out. What many of us are waking up to is the fact that we've been lied to by our leaders, by celebrities, by media, and people are calling out the hypocrisy, the lies, and the manipulation, as well as the gross abuse of power. Many of these influential, high-powered leaders are being exposed as frauds, as well as outright criminal. And what really burst the dam open, in my opinion, is the exposure of these Twitter files in which we have been seeing the suppression of media talking anything about the violations that have been discovered. What's really worrying about all of this is seeing the accelerated push now by these leaders of the so-called free world trying to implement legislation that take away the right to thought and expression, as well as taking away freedoms of having privacy. What happened at Twitter should be eye-opening to realize that this is happening across all digital platforms.
The fact that Twitter was working hand in glove with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the intelligence community to suppress free speech and things that were not true is disturbing. That is why we are here today.
I think the only good thing that I can say about studying what has happened with the royal family and Meghan and Harry leaving is learning about the manipulation, how the media works, and actually now seeing how we've been manipulated. When I worked in corporate America, I actually believed all this diversity and inclusion and being open and that they would be fair. And day in, day out, they would pump CNN, MSNBC, and when number 45 got elected into office, and every day, all these stations that were played 24/7 in the office, nonstop bashed this man. So in the work environment and the culture, you couldn't be a supporter of that side. In fact, how could you be a supporter of that side when you're hearing all these negative things and the people around you are equally believing it and also talking it? So God forbid you went against the grain, you would pretty much be outcasted if you had different views. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of the abuse that I suffered in that company, but what I can honestly say is that I did believe them when they talked about diversity, inclusion, bridging the gender gap. But what I realized after what they did to me was that I was just a diversity quota for them. 5 years of working really hard and meeting and over-exceeding expectations, and still was the lowest paid on the team of 50 white Caucasian men. And the kicker to all of it was that I had the most experience as well as advanced educational degrees. But anyhow, I can't cry over spilt milk, and I think everything happens for a reason and lessons to be learned out of it. What I can say is that God is good. God got me through all of this, and perhaps maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my voice. Anyhow, let me get back to it. So the media plays a big role in this manipulation and brainwashing. As you can see on the screen, you have media outlets that should be familiar to you because these are the ones also that had been proing Meghan Markle. You can see that they downplayed the seriousness and focused on topics that deflected away from really actually violating the First Amendment rights of American people. And let me be honest with you, as a result of it being downplayed in the media, I didn't pay attention at the time when the hearing happened. It was when these two American heroes, Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, when testified and mentioned Prince Harry's name on the Aspen Institute report, is when my ears perked up and I started to look into this and seeing how bad this all was for Twitter. I guess part of the reason why I didn't pay attention is that I didn't really care about Hunter Biden, and we were so consumed with all the things that were happening with the new king as well as Meghan and Harry shenanigans on a daily basis that we were so distracted, or at least I know I was. But now having the time to go back to it and revisit Harry's involvement with these Twitter files, you then start to understand that it wasn't just about a laptop. It's more serious than that. So, in Michael Schellenberger's testimony to the House Select Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, he talks about this censorship industrial complex. And I'm just going to give it to you from the actual testimony so there is 100% accuracy. So he starts in the executive summary of how this name came to be. And he begins with saying, in his 1961 farewell address, President Dwight Eisenhower warned of the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military industrial complex. Eisenhower feared that the size and power of the complex or cluster of government contractors and the Department of Defense would endanger our liberties or democratic processes. How? Through domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money. He feared public policy would become the captive of a scientific technological elite. Today, American taxpayers are unwittingly financing the growth and power of a censorship industrial complex run by America's scientific and technological elite, which endangers our liberties and democracy. The Twitter files, state attorneys general lawsuits, and investigative reporters have revealed a large and growing network of government agencies, academic institutions, and non governmental organizations that are actively censoring American citizens, often without their knowledge, on a range of issues, including on the origins of that bug that was flying around, the jab, emails relating to the laptop, climate change, renewable energy, fossil fuels, and many other issues. Now, as you know, I had to edit that to be YouTube friendly, but I could honestly say other issues. Yeah, censoring people who criticize Meghan Markle was also another one. But government officials have been caught repeatedly pushing social media platforms to censor disfavored users and content. Often, these acts of censorship threaten the legal protection social media companies need to exist, Section 230. Moreover, we know that the U.S. government has funded organizations that pressure advertisers to boycott news media organizations and social media platforms that A, refuse to censor and or B, spread disinformation, including alleged conspiracy theories. The Stanford Internet Observatory, the University of Washington, the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, and Graphica all have inadequately disclosed ties to the Department of Defense, the CIA, and other intelligence agencies. They work with multiple U.S. government agencies to institutionalize censorship research and advocacy within dozens of other universities and think tanks. Who are the censors? They are a familiar type, overly confident in their ability to discern truth from falsity, good intention from bad intention. The instinct of these hall monitor types is to complain to the teacher, and if the teacher doesn't comply, go above them to the principal. These organizations and others are also running their own influence operations, often under the guise of fact checking. The intellectual leaders of the censorship complex have convinced journalists and social media executives that accurate information is disinformation, that valid hypotheses are conspiracy theories, and that greater self censorship results in more accurate reporting. In many instances, censorship, such as labeling social media posts, is part of the influence operation aimed at discrediting factual information. The censorship industrial complex combines established methods of the psychological manipulation, some developed by the US military during the global war on terror, with highly sophisticated tools from computer science, including artificial intelligence. The complex leaders are driven by the fear that the internet and social media platforms empower populists, alternative, and fringe personalities and views, which they regard as destabilizing. Federal government officials, agencies, and contractors have gone from fighting ISIS recruiters and Russian bots to censoring and deplatforming ordinary Americans and disfavored public figures. Importantly, the bar for bringing in military grade government monitoring and speech countering techniques have moved from countering terrorism to countering extremism to countering simple misinformation. The government no longer needs a predicate of calling you a terrorist or extremist to deploy government resources to counter your political activity. The only predicate it needs is simply the assertion that the opinion you expressed on social media is wrong. These efforts extend to influencing and even directing conventional news media organizations. Now, here's something to pay attention to. Since 1971, when the Washington Post and New York Times elected to publish classified Pentagon papers about the war in Vietnam, journalists understood that we have a professional obligation to report on leaked documents whose contents are in the public interest, even when they had been stolen. And yet, in 2020, the Aspen Institute and Stanford's Cyber Policy Center urge journalists to break the Pentagon Papers principle and not cover leaked information to prevent the spread of disinformation. Government funded censors frequently invoke the prevention of real world harm to justify their demands for censorship, but the censors define harm far more expansively than the Supreme Court does. The censors have defined harm so broadly, in fact, that they have justified Facebook censoring accurate information about the C-19 jab, for example, to prevent jab hesitancy. Their goal clearly is not protecting the truth, but rather persuading the public. That is the purpose of open debate and the free exchange of ideas. Persuasion by covert means is censorship. And increasingly, the censors say their goal is to restrict information that delegitimizes governmental, industrial, and news media organizations. That mandate is so sweeping that it could easily censor criticism of any part of the status quo, from elected officials to institutions to laws. This extreme reactionary attitude is, bluntly, un American. So, in summary, the censorship industrial complex is a network of ideologically aligned governmental, NGO, and academic institutions that discovered over the last few years the power of censorship to protect their own interests against the volatility and risks of the democratic process. They are not defending democracy as they claim. Rather, they are defending their own policy and interests against democracy. The leaders and participants in this censorship industrial complex have been involved in spreading disinformation, including conspiracy theories, while discrediting accurate information and alleging that valid theories were debunked conspiracy theories. Honestly, if Megan really wants to be the face of something, then let it be the face of this censorship industrial complex. This couple have been involved with, as we know, Harry was a commissioner on the Aspen Institute. Their Fugazi Foundation, Archwell, had been involved with Open Society and Omidyar Network. Let's not forget that they were at Stanford when they first came over here and probably got indoctrinated into this idea to be a part of swindling the whole world. And let's not forget the no bid contract that Harry received from the military for Better Up is probably a reason why our Department of Homeland Security doesn't want to give information about this guy. Now, is it shocking to see that the behavior of this complex mirrors the behavior of what we have been experiencing over the last few years with this couple, between the censoring of people and shutting people's accounts down, the bots, the forcing the propaganda down our throats here in the United States on a daily basis about these two and their truth, it explains a lot of what has been going on and Meghan and Harry, specifically Harry's direct involvement. I think one of the things that we need to look at and understand is what was the role of being a commissioner on this report and putting it together. We all know that the Aspen Institute for this project received about $3.5 million of taxpayer money. What were they doing? Also, keep this in perspective that the government contracted this work and gave money to this group to do work for them. So technically, Harry did work for the American government, which means he was acting on behalf of the state. This is the important thing that I want you to keep in the back of your minds as we go through this. So, according to the report, it has been authored by 3 co-chairs of the Aspen Institute's Commission on Information Disorder, Katie Couric, Chris Krebs, and Rashad Robinson. The commissioners, which Harry is one of them, contributed to the report throughout the process through research, deliberation and discussion, and collaborative working groups which produced the draft recommendations. In the second phase, the commissioners convened in smaller working groups to discuss in detail the most effective pathways to solutions. The commission deliberated on the nature of information disorder by reviewing the structural issues and consequences of an expedient digital information system. In August, members of the commission gathered in Aspen, Colorado. Clearly, as you can see there, Harry was there because he went to go play polo and handled business and then flew back on his private jet. But he was there to discuss and deliberate proposed solutions and recommendations, weighing in on which actions would have meaningful impact and which would face the most hurdles, from whom and why. In the weeks following the meeting, commissioners worked individually and in groups to further consult with topic and issue experts who could provide the practical and intellectual understanding needed to nuance each recommendation. And throughout the 6 months, commissioners wrestled with how to effectively acknowledge, incorporate, and speak to the various modalities of information disorder. They sorted through the many definitions of misinformation and evaluated how best to respond to it. This made for hard decisions on what to embrace in the recommendations, what not to and why, and whether the recommendations in their totality will truly impact information disorder. Ultimately, we determined that some items discussed fell out of scope of the Commission's mission, but some of those ideas, as well as possible solutions that require more thought and research than we were able to expand in our time-bound work, will be featured separately on the Commission's website. Honestly, how could Harry be a part of this, considering just a couple months prior, he sat down and spewed out a whole bunch of lies on global television? Or I wonder if he was a use case in tracking to see how misinformation spreads. So the commissioners focused on paid promotion tools and product features that drive amplification of mis and disinformation, particularly on social media platforms, aka other news outlets and media and companies that are not aligned with their agenda. And what have we seen happen? Demonetized, canceled, pretty much shut down. Now, I do agree that Section 230 does need to be updated to include some accountability by these platforms, but I don't think it's these people that need to be making the recommendation. So for those that don't know what Section 230 is, let's hear it from Jack Dorsey himself.
Okay, thank you, members of the Commerce Committee, for the opportunity to speak with the American people about Twitter and Section 230. My remarks will be brief so we can get to questions. Section 230 is the most important law protecting internet speech, and removing Section 230 will remove speech from the internet. Section 230 gave internet services 2 important tools. The first provides immunity from liability for users' content. The second provides good Samaritan protections for content moderation and removal. even of constitutionally protected speech, as long as it's done in good faith.
So here's the thing. Section 230, in my opinion, and the way that I interpret this, is not bulletproof, because what they were doing at Twitter with the government, as well as with these NGOs by censoring Americans, was not done in good faith. And looking at it from that perspective would mean that this clause would be not applicable. Now, nobody has ever gone up against these corporations to take on suing them for being censored, but in my opinion, there's always a first. Now, I wonder if the government is also going to investigate Facebook and Google for similar practices that the government had with Twitter. Anyhow, back to the commissioners. So the commissioners also discussed the need to adjust journalistic norms to avoid false equivalencies between lies and empirical fact in the pursuit of both sides and objectivity, particularly in areas of public health, civil rights, or election outcomes. This has to make you laugh because the same think tank is comprised of people who back media outlets that lie to our faces. So Harry's working on this commission, and meanwhile, he has all the media outlets here in the United States pushing his propaganda. So this commission is suggesting and introducing the idea in a very sneaky and manipulative way of opening up platforms to give access to vital research and reporting of our data. And the way that they say it here is that academic and journalistic research of data from the platforms have both demonstrated the importance of access to platform data and showcased the efforts that social media platforms have made to keep this access limited. Commissioners acknowledge instances where private software companies such as Dropbox and Mozilla have created programs with contracted researchers who work to uncover vulnerabilities in their systems, yeah, wink, wink, and help protect valuable customer data without being exposed to possible legal liability. So, in other words, they want it opened up so they can get your data and make money and sell it, but also put you on a naughty list if, let's say, you don't share the same ideas or opinions as what they're trying to do here in controlling the population. And they're gently approaching this because it violates our Fourth Amendment right, which protects the American people from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. So, what France is doing right now with the surveillance on the cell phones would be a no-no here at this moment. This next one here is just laughable. So the commissioners find that truth and transformation is important while they endorse efforts that focus on exposing how historical and current imbalances of power, access, and equity are manufactured and propagated further with mis and disinformation, and on promoting community-led solutions to forging social bonds that can resist it. So essentially, if you don't believe whatever narrative that they're spinning of the day, then you're pushing disinformation, misinformation, and you should be banned, essentially. But nobody's saying anything about these two super spreaders who have all the access and privilege to spew out lies, causing negative impact and destruction wherever they go without consequence. So, this last demand that the commissioners are dictating says that relying solely on blunt instruments such as platform liability is not enough, but commissioners are urging companies to essentially be more responsible stewards overall and have proposed solutions to increase transparency and accountability where they have fallen short already. Public sentiment, and I don't know who they asked, but they're saying public sentiment underscores the disappointment and frustration with tech companies' failure in this area, with roughly half of U.S. adults indicating that the government should take steps to restrict false information, even if it means losing some freedom to access and publish content. Do you hear that? Let me read the last line again. Even if it means losing some freedom to access and publish content. And finally, once again, the commissioners, that included Prince Harry, so they raised the issue again about getting people's data and violating people's privacy, because we all know that data is the new gold, in which the commissioners recognize that increased access to data will raise difficult questions and trade-offs relating to privacy. So the key is to find ways that researchers can conduct their work while protecting the privacy of everyday consumers. I would be willing to bet that the technical advisor who was part of this project, Renee DiResta, was the one who wrote those clever little manipulative lines about access for the researchers to the data. She and Yoel Roth, these two traders, were technical advisors on this commission, helping the commissioners. So throughout the preparation and planning process, the commission engaged with a variety of individuals who have technical expertise and experience with the platforms. Their role, these two with others, were to be on hand to provide commissioners with enhanced understanding of the issues it considered and to provide advice as requested on potential solutions it might recommend. So, as part of the discussions, Renee DiResta, as you can see here, was having discussions around conspiracy theories and coordinated campaigns. Let's talk about Renee DiResta for a quick second. This is a woman who Harry and Meghan had access to. Keep that in mind. So this woman, Renee, worked for the CIA and was balls deep with them. She is the one that's advocating for more access to people's data in the name of advocating for the so-called researchers.
There are trade-offs with any of these regulatory methodologies. So interestingly, with privacy, with privacy constraints in Europe, that negatively impacts security researchers. So people who are investigating disinformation campaigns in Europe don't have quite the same visibility as some of us do in campaigns that are localized in the US.
Don't you love the use of the word campaigns? Hate campaigns, bot campaigns, targeted campaigns. This is all coming from these people. In my next video, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this woman and how dangerous she is, along with this whole entire complex and what it means for our freedoms. But now let's talk about Yoel Roth and his involvement with our government from the Twitter side. Keep in mind, Harry had access to this guy as he was doing work on behalf of our government.
Mr. Roth, have you communicated with government officials ever on a platform called Jira? Yes or no? Real quick answer. We're on the clock.
Not
yes
to
or no?
the best of my recollection.
Not
no.
to your recollection? Great. If you did, in the event, communicate, who would have had access to this platform?
That's the nature of my confusion.
Okay.
Jira
Did you ever speak to government officials on Jira regarding taking down social media posts?
Again, not to the best of my recollection.
Can you explain to me why the federal government would ever have interest in communicating through Jira, mind you, a private cloud server, with social media companies without oversight to censor American voices? I want to let you know that this is a violation of the First Amendment, and the federal government is colluding with social media companies to censor Americans. Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to submit these graphics into record. And Mr. Roth, I'm going to refresh your memory for you. This flowchart behind me. Ordered. Thank you, Chair. This flowchart shows the following federal agencies, social media companies, Twitter, leftist nonprofits, and organizations communicating regarding their version of misinformation using Jira, a private cloud server. On this chart, I want to annotate that the Department of Homeland Security, which has the following branches: Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA, Countering Foreign Intelligence Task Force, now known as the Misinfo, Disinfo, and Malinformation, MDM. This was again used against the American people. The Election Partnership Institute, or Election Integrity Partnership, EIP, which includes the following: Stanford Internet Observatory, University of Washington Center for Informed Public, Graphica, and Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, and potentially, according to what we found on the final report by EIP, the DNC. The Center for Internet Security, CIS, a nonprofit funded by DHS, the National Association of Secretaries of State, also known as NASS, and the National Association of State Election Directors, NASED, and in this case, because there are other social media companies involved, Twitter. What do all of these groups, though, have in common? And I'm going to, again, refresh your memory. They were all communicating on a private cloud server known as Jira. Now, the screenshot behind me, which is an example of one of thousands, shows on November 3rd, 2020, that you, Mr. Roth, a Twitter employee, were exchanging communications on Jira, a private cloud server, with CISA, NASS, NASED, and Alex Stamos, who now works at Stanford and is a former security officer at Facebook, to remove a posting. Do you now remember communicating on a private cloud server to remove a posting? Yes or no?
I wouldn't agree with the characterization.
I don't care if you agree. This is your stuff. Yes or no, did you communicate with a private entity, the government agency, on a private cloud server, yes or no?
The question was if I
Yes or no? Yeah, I'm
remove-
on time. Yes or no?
Ma'am, I don't believe I can give you a yes or no.
Well,
answer to
I'm going
that
to tell you
question.
right now that you did, and we have proof of it. This, ladies and gentlemen, is joint action between the federal government and a private company to censor and violate the First Amendment. This is also known, and I'm so glad that there's many attorneys on this panel, joint state actors. It's highly illegal. You are all engaged in this action, and I want you to know that you will be all held accountable. Ms. Gaddy, are you still on CISA's Cybersecurity Advisory Council? Yes or no?
Yes, I am.
Okay. For those who have said that this is a pointless hearing, and I just want to let you guys all know, we found that Twitter was indeed communicating with the federal government to censor Americans. I'd like to remind you that this was all in place before January 6th. So to say that these mechanisms weren't in place and to make it about January 6th, I want to let you know that you guys were actually in control of all of the content, and clearly we have proof of that. Now, if you don't think that this is important to your constituents and the American people from those saying that this was a pointless hearing, I suggest you find other jobs. Chairman, I yield my time.
I'd like to point out here that the Duke of Sussex had put on his Archwell website that alongside leaders from the public and private sectors, as well as policy experts, and the amount of lobbying that they were doing all over town, yeah, I too could see that this guy is actually an actor for the state. Prince Harry had been lobbying in 2020, so all of this going on with the election and hearing this come out of his mouth.
Jack and I were emailing each other prior to January the 6th, where I warned him that his platform was allowing a coup to be staged. That email was sent the day before, and then it happened, and I haven't heard from him since.
That was the same Wired event that Renee DiResta was also a part of. I sure would like to know how Harry knew about this, because it has been disclosed from this very same hearing Twitter executives were aware about this.
First, Twitter's leadership bent and broke their own rules in order to protect some of the most dangerous speech on the platform. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened in the months leading up to January 6th. During this time, my team worked to try to minimize the threat of violence that we saw coming. On January 5th, when the policy was still not approved, I led a meeting where one of my colleagues asked management whether someone was going to have to get shot before we were allowed to take down tweets. Another colleague looked up live tweets and read them to management to try to convince them of the seriousness of the issue. Still, no action was taken. On the morning of January 6th, I sent Twitter lawyers a message warning them that our team was hamstrung by leadership. The second problem is that there is way too much power concentrated in the hands of too few.
I guess I would like to know is why was Prince Harry never questioned by our government on how he knew about this so-called coup? Apparently Twitter knew about it, and clearly we see he had access to all the right people who were in on this. I mean, as you can see here, Harry got involved with this election. Whether or not he wants to admit it, he was lobbying. Does anybody know if he registered as a foreign agent? I highly doubt he did. And you know what that means? Failure to do that is breaking the law, and he should be removed immediately. So, since Harry has been clearly documented as a willing participant in lobbying during our elections, as well as pushing agendas for interfering with our policies and our civil rights, and clearly not a citizen, there is a violation, according to our law. Doing work for the Aspen Institute, in which our government had given taxpayer money to fund the project, and where the work actually shows up in a government document in the Federal Trade Commission report dated June 16, 2022. Harry's commission report is all over it, making recommendations left and right on how policy should be shaped. If you want to pause it, feel free to do so. I'd like to just put this out here. This is important for Samantha's case. Let's remember that she was canceled on Twitter, as many others, but being that she has a court case, then perhaps maybe this is something that the judge may want to hear about. Her civil rights, as well as many others, had been violated. And there is a clause. You see, her civil rights, as well as many others, have been violated as a result of the behavior and practice of this censorship industrial complex. And Harry clearly is a part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Baker, Ms. Gaddy, Mr. Roth, and Ms. Navaroli. You can consider your speech canceled during my time because you canceled mine. You see, you permanently banned my personal Twitter account, and it was my campaign account also. So let's talk about election interference, shall we? January 2nd, 2002, you permanently banned my Twitter account. This was the account that I would put my campaign ads on, raise money on, fight back when attacked with lies, and be able to talk to my voters in my district. But you banned it. And then let me explain. My account was not reinstated until November 21st, 2022. That was after my election on November 8th. You know, at your company, or your former company where you worked, Twitter employees, over 98% of them donate to Democrats. So while you coordinated with DHS, the FBI, the CIA, our government, and outside groups to permanently ban, shadow ban conservative Americans and candidates like me and the former president of the United States, President Donald J. Trump, you were censoring and wrongfully violating our First Amendment free speech rights. Guess what? None of you hold security clearances. None of you are elected, and none of you represent 750,000 people like I do. Let's explain. 52 United States Law 10101. No person shall intimidate, threaten, coerce, or attempt to stop any other person for the purpose of interfering with their rights to vote, or to vote as he may choose. You didn't shadow ban or permanently ban my Democrat opponent. No, you did that to me. And that was wrong, and it was against the law. You see, not only that, was it me that you violated my First Amendment rights, you violated countless conservative Americans. These were doctors that were trying to tell the truth about COVID, doctors that were having success treating people with ivermectin that you all would not allow to be talked about on your platform. These were parents complaining about their school boards, teaching gender lies in their schools, biological males entering their daughters' bathrooms and sports. These were also people questioning the 2020 election, and guess what? That's Americans' First Amendment right. These were people talking about voting machines. You know what? Democrats did that in 2019, before the 2020 election. On Twitter, people could question elections such as 2016, saying Hillary won, but in 2020, no one could question elections saying Trump won. You abuse the power of a large corporation, big tech, to censor Americans. And you want to know something? Guess what? I'm so glad that you're censored down. I'm so glad you've lost your jobs. And you know what? Let's talk about something a little bit further. It's amazing to me, Mr. Roth, as the head and trust of safety at Twitter, your ability, or should I say inability, to remove child porn. Now, here's something that disgusts me about you. In your doctoral dissertation entitled Gay Data, you argued that minors should have access to Grindr, an adult male gay hookup app. Minors? Really? You know, Elon Musk took over Twitter and he banned 44,000 accounts that were promoting child porn. You permanently banned my Twitter account, but you allowed child porn all over Twitter. Twitter had become a platform, you said, connecting queer young adults. You also wrote on Twitter in 2010, can high school students ever meaningfully consent to sex with their teachers? In 2021, while you were the director of trust and safety on Twitter, an underage boy and his mother announced a lawsuit against Twitter because Twitter was benefiting from and refused to remove a lewd video featuring this boy and another minor. That is repulsive. But you violated me. What were my tweets? Okay, let's talk about them. I was talking about the deaths being reported on VAERS. By the way, that's on the CDC website. I was also saying that I didn't think any entity should enforce a non-FDA approved vaccine or mask. Guess what? A lot of people agreed with me, but you called that COVID misinformation. By the way, I'm a member of Congress and you're not. I also said the controversial COVID-19 vaccines should not be forced on our military. You want to know something? Republicans stopped that in the NDAA.
In part 3, we're going to talk a little bit more about the law and the dangers of allowing these people to get away with what they have been doing. Our freedoms right now are in jeopardy, clearly. And if we don't make noise, if we don't raise these issues, if we don't call it out and allow for this to take over and restrict your freedom, then it's over. They essentially own you. God did not put us on this earth to serve these people. Remember that. So stay tuned for the third and final part to this series. I'm going to give some suggestions as what we can do together to prevent this to get worse, because it's going to get worse if we don't do anything. On that note, please leave your comments and thoughts below, and as always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
I was such a fraud.